Hello, 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 hello. Do you know what I don't have? There it is. Hi, you guys. Gonna put this on, and hey, there we go. The guess sometimes I can be heard better if I'm plugged in. So there we go. Hi. So this is day one. Every day is day one, I guess. But um, we the last year, the last 365 days, we've read from this little book and kind of given a little talk and read from that little book and boy, there's been so many possibilities of what we could do going forward, and I've looked at a lot of them. There's a little book I looked at called God Calling. I've had for many years. um, I thought about using the Tao Te Ching, and I might still do that. There's some great pieces in there I'd love to do. I thought maybe the Bhagavad Gita, because I love this. The Bhagavad Gita is so amazing. And another little book called Daily Reflections. I looked at that, and, and nothing. It wasn't just jumping out at me. It wasn't just jumping out at me. Another one that I wouldn't mind looking at sometimes, the Book of Psalms, which seems to be, according to my friend David Hawkins, our friend David Hawkins, he says the Book of Psalms is very high vibration. So maybe another time we'll look at that. It goes on and on. I pulled out of my shelf Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I thought, oh gosh, but it just wasn't. I wasn't trying to decide from intellectual place. I was hi Don. I was trying to decide what to do next from my gut, from my heart, and I'm not sure that there is a next. But I know that there's something for today, and we'll do this today and see what wants to come after that. What I picked was a reading from Sermon on the Mount. Emmet Fox. This book, by the way, was published in 1934, and so those of us who Emmet Fox at the turn of the century and in the early part of the last century was an amazing spiritual teacher. He really was, and so our friend Bill Wilson would have been influenced by his writing, and he wrote a lot. He traveled the world. He taught a lot, and what came up was this came up, and it was just. And I opened to a page in the book. Actually, as I was looking at the front of it this morning, and I was sitting with what's next, it said here, this book is a distilled essence of years of Bible and metaphysical study, the many lectures I've delivered. And he suggests that we go to page 183 and start there and then come back, and so I did. That was his suggestion. I forget where that was, but somewhere in here he suggested we go there first, and so I went to 183, 182, 183, and no, it wasn't. Let me just look back here. There it is. He suggested we go to, yeah, okay, that was it, 183. And it was amazing. I read it and I thought, my gosh, this is so cool, and hi Don. And so I'm going to read, not probably the whole reading. It's his piece on this short part of the Lord's Prayer, and remember what he says is that the teachings of Christ were not Christian teachings. There was no Christianity. And Christianity is something we've created. Religion is something we've created. So he did a beautiful job. Anyway, it says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us." This clause is the turning point of the prayer. is the strategic key to the whole treatment. Let us notice here that Jesus has so arranged his marvelous prayer that it covers the entire ground of the unfoldment of our souls completely. The unfoldment of our souls completely. In the most conscious and telling way. It omits nothing that is essential for our salvation, and yet so complete is it that it is not a thought or a word too much. So complete is it that it is not a thought or a word too much. Every idea fits into its place with perfect harmony and in perfect sequence. Everything, anything, it says, anything more would have been redundance. Anything less would have been incompleteness. At this point, it keeps up the crucial factor. It takes up the crucial factor of forgiveness. Having told us, he says, what God is, having told us what God is, what man is, how the universe works, how we are to do our own work, the salvation of humanity and of our own souls, he then explains what our true nourishment or supply is, the way in which we can obtain it, and how he comes to the forgiveness of sins, and how he comes to the forgiveness of sins. The forgiveness of sins is a central problem of life. I get that. I've been plagued most of my life with what I would call guilt or shame, and and judgment of others. So the forgiveness of sin is the central problem of life. Sin is a sense of separation from God and is the major tragedy of human experience. So, and this is something that, that I've been saying for a long time, that there is no separation. We're not separate from, and that's really, I've always found the problem with most religions is that it preaches a sense of separation. So it is, of course, rooted in selfishness. So this sense of separation is rooted in selfishness, is essentially an attempt to gain some supposed good to which we are not entitled in justice. It's interesting because in the 12-step program, it says the root of our problem is selfishness and self-centeredness, and it says exactly that right here. It is, of course, rooted in selfishness, essentially an attempt to gain some supposed good to which we are not entitled in justice. It is a sense of isolation, true for the addict and the alcoholic, isn't it? Self-regarding, personal existence, whereas the truth of being is that all is one. I love that. Whereas the truth of being is that all is one. Our true selves are at one with God, undivided from him, it, her, that, expressing his ideas, witnessing to his nature, the dynamic thinking of that mind. Because we are all one with the great whole of which we are spiritually a part, it follows that we are one with all men, or all mankind. Just because in him we live and move, have our being, we are, in the absolute sense, all essentially one. Isn't that beautiful? Evil, it says, or sin, the fall of man, in fact, is essentially the attempt to navigate this truth in our thought, not navigate, but negative, attempt to negative this truth in our thoughts. We try to live apart from the one. Good luck. We try to live apart from the one, from God. We try to do without him. We act as though we had life of our own, as separate minds, as though we could have plans and purposes and interests separate from his. All this, if it were true, would mean that existence is not one and harmonious, but a chaos of competition and strife. Let me read that again. All this, if it were true, would mean that existence is not one and harmonious, but a chaos of competition and strife. It would mean that we are quite separate from our fellow man and could injure him, rob him or hurt him, or even destroy him without any damage to ourselves. And in fact, that the more we took from other people, the more we should have for ourselves, if that were true. It would mean that the more we considered our own interests, the more indifferent we were to the welfare of others, the better off we should be. Of course, it would then follow naturally that it would pay others to treat us the same way, and that accordingly we might expect many of them to do so. None of this, now, if this were true, it would mean that the whole universe is only a jungle, and that sooner or later it must destroy itself by its own inherent weakness and anarchy. But of course it is not true, and therein lies the joy of life. Undoubtedly, more people do act as though they believe it is true, and a great many more who would be dreadfully shocked if brought face to face with that proposition in cold blood have nevertheless a vague feeling that such must be very much the way things are, even though they themselves are personally above consciously acting in accordance with such a notion. Now this is the real basis of sin, of resentment, of condemnation, of jealousy, of remorse, and all the evil brood that walk that path. This belief of independent and separate existence is the arch sin. And when he says sin, sin was a word, an English word for missing the mark. It, just means that we were wrong. This idea that we're separate is wrong, and that's, if anything, this next short while, my goal is to bring us to this place where we recognize that we are one with that, and we start to see how ego, this idea of separateness, it just doesn't work for us. So today I'm reading from the Sermon on the Mount from Emmet Fox, because he nailed it. He nailed it. I'm reading a small portion in the back here. And he's quoting from a prayer which was attributed to Jesus. And it said, before we can progress any further, we have to take the knife to this evil thing and cut it out once and for all. Jesus knew this, and with this definite end in view, he inserted at this crucial point a carefully prepared statement that would compass our end and his, without the shadow of possibility of miscarry. He inserted what is nothing less than a trip clause. He drafted a declaration that would force us, without any conceivable possibility of escape, evasion, or mental reservation, or subterfuge of any kind, to execute the great sacrament of forgiveness in all its fullness and far-reaching power. As we repeat the great prayer intellectually, considering and meaning what we say, we're suddenly, so to speak, caught up off our feet and grasped as though in a vice, so that we must face this problem. And there's no escape. We must positively and definitely extend forgiveness to everyone to whom it is possible that we can owe forgiveness, namely to anyone who we think can have injured us in any way. Jesus leaves no room for any possible glossing of this fundamental thing. He has constructed his prayer with such skill that ever yet lawyer displayed in the casting of a deed. He has contrived it that once our attention has been drawn to this matter, we are inevitably obliged to either to forgive our enemies in sincerity and truth, or never again to repeat that prayer. It is safe to say that no one who reads this booklet with understanding will ever again be able to use the Lord's Prayer unless and until he has forgiven. Should you now attempt to repeat it without forgiving, it can safely be predicted that you will not be able to finish it. This great central clause will stick in your throat. Wow. So that's a little Emmet Fox, uh, the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know what I'll do tomorrow, but I've got a lot of material that we can read from for sure. I love Emmet Fox. There's a ton of in this book, As a Man Thinketh. I mean, there's just a ton in here, and all of it geared towards bringing us to that realization that we are not separate. And I've been listening to Muji a lot lately, who I considered quite awakened, and his direction is all in that we are not separate. And when we become one with the moment, then we realize that nothing is missing. That there's nothing is needed, nothing is missing. That as things are perfect, and that we're all on what I call a need to know basis. When we need to know, we'll know. And so we just leave things. We can actually, there's no need ever to be stressed, ever to be stressed, unless we're trying to run the show. And when we're trying to run the show, then we're running it from a place of often fear, separateness. Okay, so love you, and that's the reading. That's the deal. Shall we take a little quiet minute? Hey, let's try that. Just just a moment to sit in the stillness. Let this idea percolate in us, that we are not separate, that we are one, that you and I are more than just brothers and sisters. We are the same mind. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love you. Love is all there is.